Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. The Timberwolves defeated the San Antonio Spurs on Wednesday, just a couple days after being absolutely annihilated by these same Spurs. The Wolves bounced back between a huge first quarter and 34 points from Anthony Edwards and strong games from Jaylen Nowell and Karl-Anthony Towns to hold off the Spurs. We're going to break down the whole game here today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Thursday, coming off the Wednesday win. Happy Victory Thursday. Today, this is the post-game podcast. We're going to break down the entire Wolves win over the Spurs from Wednesday. Key takeaways plus individual studs and duds. A big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, you can find this show free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, and that's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. A reminder that Locked On Wolves, along with all the other Locked On Minnesota sports podcasts, are available on Roku and Amazon Fire TV as part of the all-new Locked On Sports Minnesota app. More great local sports coverage 24/7. It's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. All right. Wolves beat the Spurs on Wednesday by 12. This, of course, was the same Spurs team that led the Wolves by 35 points in the fourth quarter on Monday and ultimately beat the Wolves by 9. We spent the last couple of days, trying to figure out what's wrong with the Wolves. Is this guy actually falling? The whole Wednesday podcast here at Locked On Wolves, I tried to, dissect these quotes that everyone else was dissecting as well. The Cat about Ant's diet and Ant about his energy level and Finch about the team's effort and, the social media stuff with Cat and with Rudy and all this stuff. And then, of course, on Wednesday, they came out and played exactly how we would expect them to in the first quarter, which was kind of like their hair was on fire, like they had something to prove. And Anthony Edwards was the one to kind of steer the ship early and late in this game. So my number one takeaway is Anthony Edwards' all-around performance in this game. Ant had 15 in the first quarter. He had 5 made threes and I believe 6 attempts, 4 assists. It was an all-around strong first quarter. It wasn't just that he was flamethrowing from deep. He was largely making good decisions. I think he had one heat check, which was warranted at that point in the first quarter. But otherwise, his shot selection was good. He was passing the ball. He a couple of times dribbled himself into some traffic, drew the defense, and kicked it out for an open three-point shooter. Jaden McDaniels was the beneficiary at one point. Maybe twice in the first quarter. D'Lo was the beneficiary at one point of a Anthony Edwards assist, but the decision making was on point. And the energy that Ant came out and played with, getting out in transition, the urgency to get back. If you compare Monday night's game to Wednesday night's game and only look at Ant's effort running up and down the court, that tells the story. Just getting back on defense. And that goes for the whole Wolves team. But at this point in the show, I'm focusing on Ant. Which, of course, it's a two-sided coin because it shows you how miserable Monday was. And like, hey, really, it's not acceptable to have just a complete zero effort. But hey, if that's the wake-up call, and Ant talked about this post-game, like, hey, this is the punch in the face or punch in the mouth, whatever he said, this is what we needed on Monday, apparently. Well, hopefully they don't need one every time they win a game. Remember that it was that way for a while last year, kind of middle of the season. They'd win a couple games, start feeling themselves, they'd have a rough game, and then say, all right, it woke us up, and have another good game, and then have another rough game. It was like they couldn't handle success, and we're already back there again. But maybe because this team is a year older, they have more experience, more playoff experience now with Rudy Gobert and with Kyle Anderson and Bryn Forbes and Austin Rivers, and these guys that have played in big games that are on the roster. They lost Pat Bev, but the collective experience of the 4 guys I just mentioned is much greater. Perhaps that, and then these other guys having somewhat been there before, winning 46 games and going to, the playoffs and giving the 2 seed something of a run for their money. collectively, maybe that allows us to get to this point. Maybe there's a couple more stumbles here in the fall, but like we don't need to be in March and be like, okay, we can't handle a 2-game winning streak, a quote unquote 2-game winning streak. What do we do? Hopefully we've already reached that point, and this was the first, kind of step in that direction. But I digress from my point about Ant. Ant was kind of the embodiment of that in this game. Now, the middle of the game, kind of lackadaisical. Second quarter, Ant, gets his rest. He didn't do as much. Third quarter was just not good. Ant had some really sloppy possessions. He was pickpocketed a couple of times, dribbled the ball out of bounds once. And for the team as a whole, they gave up 41 points in the third quarter, which to the Spurs team, like, hey, they should never be scoring 41 points in a quarter. The only difference really in the third quarter between Monday and Wednesday was that the Wolves got theirs. They punched back. They scored the basketball. And that was a lot of Jaylen Nowell. I want to talk a ton about Jaylen later. Jaylen Nowell was a lot of the third quarter. But then in the fourth, the Spurs were only down 10 with 2.5 minutes left. And the game wasn't over. They cut it to 8. There was some anxiety, I think, kind of lingering in the building in Target Center. And then Ant just like showed up. He bookended the game basically how he started it. It wasn't a barrage of threes, but he hit a 3 or 2. He had a beautiful kind of power back down into a right box post up, drop step to his left, and just a fantastic layup that he just spun right into the basket. Just like a really powerful, smooth move. And we talked about this a little bit in Ant's season preview a couple of weeks ago. And Chris Finch has mentioned he wants to get Ant more post-ups. Like, I don't think it's a frequent thing, but he could steal 2 or 3 buckets a game by just, hey, I've got this matchup. I'm going to take him in the post. Ant has natural post moves for a guy that I'm sure he never played post, never had to play in the post at any point in his life. Maybe they made him do it if he was big as a kid. I don't know. But he didn't need to ever develop. I don't know how much time he spends working on his post game, but he has post moves that I swear there's bigs that don't have these moves today that are in the NBA, and Ant just naturally can score in the post. So at any rate, he bookended the game with just fantastic first and fourth quarters, strong effort defensively, strong effort in transition on both, offensively and defensively. Really exciting end to the game for Ant. And then he finishes this thing with 34 points. On the heels of an awful game Monday. Of course, he had 30 on Sunday against the Thunder. He also had 9 assists in this game. He had the 5 turnovers. I mentioned a lot of those came in the third quarter. I'm going to try and look it up here quick, but I bet at least 3 of them happened in the third quarter. But at any rate, great start, great finish for Ant. I've got a couple more takeaways I want to get to. Definitely related a little bit to the third quarter. I want to talk Cat. I want to talk about Nowell. We'll get to individual studs and duds, but several more things to talk about here in today's show. First, though, before we get to all that, let's talk about our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. If you have your own business, if you hire, if you're a manager anywhere and you're hiring, LinkedIn Jobs is the place to post a job. Really, you simply add your job and then you add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen today. Now, for your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, additional takeaways from Wolves Spurs on Wednesday. I thought that a quick rotation note. Naz Reid played essentially what would have been Kyle Anderson's first stint minutes. He didn't come in quite as early. Well, no, I guess he did. He came in when Rudy sat in the first quarter, and he only played 5 minutes, but he played played at the 4 next to Cat. Then he played the 5 a little bit himself, and then he started the second quarter at the 4 next to Rudy. So he played, of his 5 minutes, he probably played 3.5 of them at the 4, and we'll call it 1.5 at the 5. But then he hit the bench and never came back in the game. Rudy and Cat didn't really get into foul trouble at all, and so Chris Finch was able to stagger them and not go back to Naz in the second half. However, Naz was as good as you'd expect him to be based on what we've seen from him lately. In only 5 minutes, he had 2 points. He made his only shot attempt, 2 rebounds. He had a nice assist, and he had a steal. He was a +3 in 5 minutes. No turnovers, no fouls committed, no missed shots. A really strong stint for Naz. The Wolves only played 9 players total in this game. Kyle Anderson, of course, was not available with the back spasms. Rivers had been listed as doubtful, and he was suited up on the bench but did not play. And Bryn Forbes would have been the other rotation guy who'd played in every game so far that did not see the court. So only 9 players played, and really only 8 of them played significant minutes, 19 or more minutes for those 8 players. Naz played 5 minutes. So interesting and something to keep a pulse on with no Kyle Anderson. Hopefully Anderson's back soon. He was ruled out, a day in advance. He was ruled out on Tuesday for Wednesday's game. So hopefully it's nothing that's going to be too long-term for Anderson. And maybe he can come back in time to play Friday against the Lakers. But the rotation is really intriguing to note. Naz, though, by the way, he played, those box score numbers are nice for 5 minutes. He was really good. He was solid all the way around, regardless of who's on the floor with him over those 5 minutes. So he's making the case to stay in the rotation in some way, shape, or form, as difficult as that might be for Chris Finch because of how talented his front court is. But like in this game, for instance, this was not a strong Rudy Gobert game. Rudy was fine. I mean, he had 10 and 9, 4 of 6 shooting, but he only had 1 block, and he biffed, just completely missed a couple of block opportunities. He committed 4 fouls, a couple of them, kind of ticky-tack unnecessary fouls. It just wasn't a great game for Rudy. So more Naz minutes may not have been the worst thing in the second half. Another thing to note is the sloppy third quarter. I alluded to this earlier. And the third quarter troubles continue. The Wolves have been a net -9 in the third quarter, and they were outscored by 7 in the third quarter in this game. I should say -9 over the first 4 games. They were a -7 in the third quarter in this one. They allowed 41 points to the Spurs. Transition defense was still okay. The Spurs, to be fair, the Spurs made a ton of tough shots in the third quarter, especially, and really on the whole night. I mean, you might look at this and say they scored 122. The Wolves couldn't have played that good of defense. Well, 2 things. 1, it was certainly better than Monday. So that was the bar we're trying to clear here. And number 2, the Spurs did make a lot of tough shots. I mean, they shot 44% from 3, and most of them were guarded threes. Doug McDermott hit some tough shots. Keldon Johnson was pretty unbelievable in this game. He's a good player. You have to give the credit to the Spurs in some of these, in some instances here. Another thing to note, no offensive rebounds in this game for the Wolves. I saw a note on Twitter, and I wasn't able to 100% verify this. It wasn't by Elias Sports Bureau or anything, but somebody was claiming that this is only the 4th time in history since they started tracking offensive rebounds that a team has played a game without a single offensive rebound. I think it was played a game, not won the game, but either way, very rare to not get a single offensive rebound. Now, the Wolves shot 65% from the field in this game and 58.8% on threes. So there weren't very many offensive rebound possibilities. I mean, 65% is absurd. And 59% on threes is equally as absurd, but no offensive rebounds for the Wolves for whatever that's worth, which is weird because remember last year, they actually had a good offensive rebound rate the entire season. It was defensive rebounding that was an issue. And the Wolves on the offensive glass, non-existent tonight. They were a -11 overall in rebounds. And not a single player in the Wolves had more than 9 rebounds. Rudy led the team with 9. Cat and Jaylen Nowell each had 4 rebounds and tied for second on the Timberwolves in rebounds in this game. Another takeaway, Karl-Anthony Towns. We'll talk about him in studs and duds as well. Spoiler, but I want to spend a couple extra minutes talking about him. This was a game that goes beyond the box score. You're going to look at this game. You're going to see 21, 7 assists, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, and say, oh, that's a good game for Cap. A solid performance. But again, context matters. And yes, he's an all-star. He's an all-NBA player. The expectations are high for Karl-Anthony Towns, and they should be. But what we've seen from him the past 2 or 3 games, really since opening night, I would say. And he didn't put up big numbers opening night, but it's come out the last couple of games. The what's the right single word to describe this? I guess I'll just use more words. The complaining to the officials, the lollygagging up the court, not hustling back, the I'm going to get mine because Ant got his, like just some of these things. If you watch the Wolves and if you watch Cat enough, they crop up every now and again. The foul trouble, the out of control passes, where sometimes he does it when he's frustrated and he's trying to be, make the greatest play of all time every time down the court. And sometimes it's because he's feeling himself because he's playing so well and he throws a behind the head pass out of bounds or whatever, a crazy skip pass. We've seen this over the past, I don't know, his whole career basically. This was an under control game for Karl-Anthony Towns. I think Marnie Gellner said on the postcast that we recorded right after the game, I think the word she used was calm. Karl-Anthony Towns had a sense of calm in this game. That's an abnormal thing for Karl-Anthony Towns to have. Like usually it's going well and he's kind of all over the place, or it's going poorly and he's all over the place. This was a very calm performance from Karl-Anthony Towns. 21 points, 7 assists, only 4 rebounds, but he shot 9 of 14 from the field, 3 of 5 outside the arc. And I think only his first 3-point attempt was a bad shot. And that was an example of he didn't attempt a shot like in the whole first quarter. It said, I got to get one up, took a tough step back. His other 4 3-point attempts were all perfectly reasonable. Only one of his turnovers was atrocious, and that was he had a travel that wasn't great. But the one that was really bad was he fired a pass to Jaden McDaniels in the corner that was off target when he was driving to the basket. Towns was driving to the basket. Besides that, though, the fact that I can name the one crazy play that Towns made in this game, he was under control defensively. He was keeping his hands up. He was walling up defensively and not getting his hand in the cookie jar, not body fouling people. I think we saw one moving screen early in the game that was a questionable call. I think those are his 3 turnovers. The fact that I can remember them means that he played a really good game otherwise. This was a well-rounded, calm, under control game for Karl-Anthony Towns, and the Wolves need this more often. They need Karl-Anthony Towns to stay calm, to be measured, to kind of balance out some of the crazy antics that we see sometimes. But a strong performance from Karl-Anthony Towns, to be sure. I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't want to take the whole studs and duds segment because I want to talk about a couple more individual players because those are basically my final takeaways. I talked offensive rebounding. I talked Nas. I mean, those were kind of the other ones. We got to talk Jaden McDaniels. We got to talk Jaylen Nowell. So we're going to close the show doing individual studs and duds, but those guys for sure will be part of that conversation. So we're going to do that here next. First, though, let's talk about the title sponsors of today's show, and that is, of course, our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for betting football and the start of the new basketball season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. If you're betting basketball and football for that matter, Thursday night is a great night to do it. You got Thursday night football for the NFL. You've got, of course, the national TV games going on as well in the NBA. I think there's some college football typically Thursday nights. So there's plenty to bet on over at BetOnline. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's close with individual studs and duds. We talked about Karl-Anthony Towns, so I'll name him as a stud. I'll run through the line again quick. 21, 7 assists, 4 rebounds, 9 of 14 shooting, 3 of 5 outside the arc. No free throw attempts in this game for Cat, which is unusual. 2 steals and a block. He did have 3 turnovers, was not in foul trouble. A well-rounded game for Towns, as I've already addressed. Another stud in this game. I'm gonna go 4 studs in this game. I'm gonna break all the rules. It's gonna be crazy. Jaden McDaniels, 20 points on 8 of 9 shooting. He was 6 of 6 and 4 of 4 outside the arc at one point. Finished this game 8 of 9 and 4 of 5 on threes. 20 points, 3 rebounds, 3 blocks, 2 steals, and an assist. A very impressive performance from Jaden McDaniels. He was dominant defensively, especially early in this game in the first half. Actually dominant on both ends of the floor. He was just open 3 after open 3, making every single one of them, the first 4, 3 blocks, a couple of them really emphatic blocks on the defensive end, a couple of steals, a really strong two-way performance from Jaden McDaniels. We've seen this now, I believe, 3 out of 5 games. He's been really effective. I think it was just the game 2, the loss to the Jazz, and then game 3, the win against the Thunder, I believe, were the 2 he was in foul trouble and was a little bit quieter. But this week against the Spurs, he's been really good again, and looks a lot more like the Jaden we saw opening night against the Thunder last week. But this type of performance, he really is kind of, in a sense, the Wolves' X factor, as much as I think that's an overused term. But if Jaden comes to play and doesn't get into foul trouble, he is a really, really strong player so far this season and in the preseason for that matter. So a good game from Jaden McDaniels. Anthony Edwards, 34 points, 9 assists in this game, 12 of 21 shooting, so better than 50% from the floor, 7 of 12 outside the arc, 3 of 4 at the line. He added 3 rebounds, 2 steals. He did have 5 turnovers, but I talked about those earlier, most in the third quarter, and they were just sloppy throwaway possessions, which obviously are going to hurt you in the long run against good teams, and you have to eliminate them. But, I mean, for the most part, first and fourth quarter, we talked a lot of Ant already. He was fantastic. My fourth stat, I want to spend a little bit more time on, and I should have mentioned it before minute 20 or whatever this is of the show. Jaylen Nowell, 23 points on only 13 shots in this game. 3 of 5 outside the arc, 9 of 13 overall from the field, a perfect 2 of 2 at the line, 4 rebounds and 2 assists. No turnovers in this game for Jaylen Nowell in 22 minutes. He was phenomenal, really throughout the game. He was kind of the driving force between the Wolves holding the Spurs. I don't know if it was at arm's length, at like half arm's length, I don't know, short arm's length in the third quarter. Jaylen was really big and kind of stemming the tide. He had that monster double clutch, two-handed slam over Jakob Poeltl in the fourth quarter, I believe it was. Just all around a well-played game from Jaylen Nowell. He scored at all 3 levels. He did all the things we know he's capable of. He passed the ball well when he got the opportunity. He didn't force too much. You know, sometimes he's been doing that a little bit. It's kind of like, hey, I'm the guy off the bench. I got to score. But he made, for the most part, good decisions in this one. And you know, the no turnovers kind of indicates that as well. But a strong game from Jaylen Nowell. I was really impressed with his performance. No duds for me in this game. I'm breaking my rules again, but like everybody shot the ball well. They shot, again, 65% from the field. They made almost 2 out of every 3 of their field goal attempts in this game. It's nuts. Nobody really played poorly. I already mentioned it was kind of a Matt Gobert game, 10-9, you know, just kind of struggled, didn't catch the ball great in the paint. It just wasn't all that impressive. D'Angelo Russell was fine. It was a bit of a roller coaster for him. He had 12-9. He did have 4 turnovers and was 1 of 4 at the free throw line, which was weird, but he was fine. You know, quiet games from Taurean Prince. Jordan McLaughlin was really good, 6 and 5 in this game. Just a well-rounded game all the way around for the Wolves. The defense, giving up 122 is not great, but as I mentioned earlier, a huge part of that is the Spurs making tough shots. The Wolves transition defense, which so much of that is effort. It's effort and it's floor balance. The Wolves improved in those areas in this game. They did a much better job of getting back and at least making life a little bit difficult for the Spurs. And, you know, hats up to the Spurs for making some tough shots. I talked about Keldon Johnson. I talked about Doug McDermott. They were kind of the primary threats. And, you know, they did a good job. The Wolves did a good job defensively on Trey Jones and really most of the rest of the Spurs. So a strong all-around performance from Minnesota. Again, 4 studs, no duds. A really comforting performance, I think, after Monday's debacle. On Friday's show, this is Thursday's show. On Friday's show, we will preview Wolves-Lakers. We'll catch up with what the Lakers have been up to. They're currently, as I'm recording this, losing to the Nuggets and are likely to be 0-4 going into Friday. Who knows? Russell Westbrook's supposedly going to return Friday. It's probably a good thing for the Wolves. But remember, the Wolves have been alternating wins and losses. They struggle with success. The Lakers are going to be needing a win. It's a home game against the Lakers Friday evening. Be really interesting to see how this thing turns out. We'll preview that game on Friday. We'll kind of, again, talk about where the Lakers have been to this point, how they've gotten to what presumably will be 0-4, who's available, who's not for LA. And, you know, same for the Wolves. So that'll be Friday's show. Then, of course, we'll do another live postcast following the game with Marnie Gellner. If you listen to the live postcast, myself and Marnie, this was easily our best without technical difficulties. However, if you watched it on YouTube, or if you are watching it on YouTube, if you watched it live or watched it after the fact, I did have a mic malfunction in the middle that I was able to edit out of the audio the audio version of the podcast. So apologies for the minute of silence on the live show, or minute or give or take. Fast forward through that. The rest of it's great. No audio issues on Marnie's end. And it turned out awesome. You can also, if you're listening to this show on whatever audio platform, just listen to the audio version of the postcast, and there's no technical difficulties in that one. And it'll be the previous episode in the feed on whatever your favorite audio platform is. All right. That's all I have for today here on the show. We'll be back, of course, on Friday. Thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. You can also download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV and watch Locked On Wolves and all your other Locked On Minnesota podcasts. The app is absolutely free. You can download Locked On Sports Minnesota, the app, today on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And again, I thank you for making us your first listen. For your next listen, you can check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. It's a great listen. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.